Thank you so much for joining. I can see some people are still joining as we were speaking. But Neerja, you are a great example of being able to convey your value confidently and in a way that travels really well. So thank you so much. You are the one who initiated this conversation with me over LinkedIn, and you were able to quickly help me understand why this was a great opportunity for me as well. And there was mutual benefit in it. And that's a great example of adding value and being able to convey our value. So thank you, Nature, for role modeling that for all of us. So fantastic getting to know you a little bit through this. Welcome to everybody as all of you are joining. I'm going to move to an introduction that I have here of myself, and I always make a learning point out of it. So while Nirja has introduced me, I'm going to show you a few things about myself that have been some recent developments while I've been based here in Adelaide, Australia, and some recent career developments that I'm happy to share with you. And also then talk about this idea of being able to introduce ourselves, right? So let's wait for that conversation to happen. I am, I'm the founder of Equality Consulting, and an important part of my work is to speak with women around leadership and around fundamental, themes that may not be around leadership, but they are around just finding ourselves or being more confident in who we are, or being influential as women, and having that as a personal goal. So that's very exciting for me. So that's something I really focus on, and I run a program over here. For now, it's in person right here in Adelaide called Visible Women. I have worked with large organizations. Now I run my own consulting. I've worked for medium-sized organizations. So there's a fair amount of experience that I gathered on how, as a woman, I myself was navigating my career differently compared to my male counterparts at times, and compared to senior women that I was looking up to. And that there are some unique challenges in the system, whether they come from our conditioning or they come from the systems we are part of, or we assume some of those barriers. Maybe they are not really there, but we assume them because we are so used to them. And I realized over a period of time that if I was able to break through some barriers, it was worthwhile to share that with other women. So that's where a lot of my experience comes from, which is pretty firsthand, but I also lean on research on gender equality and leadership. Educationally, I have the basics in place, as you can see, and I try and continue to keep myself relevant to what I do, because it helps me to challenge what I think is possible for me, and it helps me to challenge other people's notions about what they think is possible for me, right? And as I was reading her expectations, which Neerja and her team sent to me in advance, I realized how many of you are probably very well educated, have completed your higher education, and you're yet asking yourself the question, how do I let the other person know that I have all these capabilities, I have these skills, I have these talents, I am an enthusiastic person, right? So I think that's something that excites me, that you have asked me those questions, and I hope I'm able to answer quite a few of them. Now, one of the things that I say to people as I introduce myself, especially in person, I don't have someone who can compliment me as well as Neerja did. But when I'm doing this all by myself, I take a longer time talking about my introduction. And that's my first step with women, right? So let's learn lesson number one right away on communicating our value, which is that when we introduce ourselves or speak our name or tell the other person why it's worthwhile for them to listen to us, do it with gusto, right? Do it with a level of confidence and clarity and self-assurance, so that the other person is motivated to listen to us, right? Now, if we speak our names a little shyly, or people didn't even hear the whole name because our voice dropped at the end of it, or we kind of hurry over our credentials, and sound kind of apologetic, whether through our body language or through some words, which discount us, even when no one is saying anything to us. When that happens, then we have already shot ourselves in the foot, right? We have already told the other person who's listening, look, it's okay for you to not listen, because I'm anyway not keen to share more about myself, or I'm hesitant to share about myself, so it's okay if you don't listen. Now, consciously, none of us want to have that effect on other people, right? But subconsciously, and through our bodies and through our voice and through our eye contact, we have conveyed that to the other person. So lesson number one, ladies, if you want to communicate your value, let's start well. Let's start well. I'm not shy about my introduction, and I don't say this in a boastful way, because that's a question many of you have asked. How can I not come across as boastful, right? So hopefully between Nirja and I, this introduction has not been as such. But I'm confident of the hard work that I have done, which I'm sure you have done, right? Of my credentials, which I have worked very hard to gather. If I'm in front of you, I come with a level of confidence that I have something to say to you that you might find useful. Now, if I don't have that level of assurance, I shouldn't be talking to you, right? And that's true for you in an interview. That's true for any of you speaking to a team, to a potential customer, to a boss, and to a peer. If we aren't confident and we haven't done our homework, we shouldn't be talking. But if you have, then let's make it count, right? So that was something that I did want to say up front. All right, these were the intentions that you would have read on the event description when you subscribed to this event. Now, I added a point here. There were only three, which was 2, 3, 4 was already on the list, but I added number one, which is feel the confidence. Feel the confidence you do have. I'm a firm believer that confidence is not something that drops out of thin air into your lap, right? It's something which we all have. As much as we have fear as an inherent emotion, we also have confidence. But we can tap into it, we can discover it, and we can call upon it. The reason I added point number one is because so many of you have asked that question or shared that roadblock in the form that you filled when you're registering for this webinar. Many of you have said, I know I'm capable, but I don't feel confident. Or I start well, but I can't finish well. Or I know I'm worthy, but I don't feel confident in front of other people, right? So in one way or the other, that word kept coming up. So I thought, well, it's worth adding it to my list today. So I hope I tell you something that will be useful to you. We'll identify and clarify your values. I'll give you some tips that you can use right away. They're quick tips because we have a short amount of time on hand. So hopefully that you can make something with that. Discover how to communicate your values. So I'll share strategies with you, right? Things that make sense. They make intuitive sense. And if you were to follow those strategies, you will do a better job than you are doing right now, right? So that's a promise I make. And number 4, learn to create a value statement. I'm going to give you some examples of value statements that you can use like a template or an example so that you can follow it and overlay your competence on those sentences. So it makes it easy. And I'd love to share with you how my value statements go, right? As an educator, as a person who talks about women and leadership, as a person who talks of diversity and inclusion, how do I think of my own value that I can communicate to someone else? So I'm happy to share my value statements. Right, all right. So more people are gathering. I can see we are more now. So hope most of us are on the same page at this point. And I want to address this question right away. You know, why do so many of us hesitate to talk about ourselves in a way which is worthwhile, which is justified, which is useful, which might make you get the job done or get the job, because that's a lot of your situation. You are in interviews or you're wanting to be in an interview. Why do so many of us step back from it, right? So let's get that off the table right away. I have some experiences and I've heard this from many women. So I hope some of this ring a bell for you. As you see these reasons, and if you have a pen and paper in front of you, or mentally, check off the ones that you know are your roadblocks. So those are your mental mindsets, right? So do this exercise with me. Maybe all of them have touched you at some point. So then tick mark all of them for yourself. Number one thing that stops us in our tracks, especially as women, in talking about ourselves is the social conditioning. My gender norms in my head got formed there.
So if someone wants to put in any comments around this aspect, I mean, what about social conditioning might be preventing you from sharing your values, you are welcome to. Meanwhile, I think participants can put in their comments if you identify with this as an aspect that stops you from sharing your value, communicating your value with the other person.
Yes, absolutely. Please, I can see the chat and I'm back online. So hope things are better now.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm just typing that hope it's better now. So now I've, pressed the button and I have gone on to the next point, which is out of practice. So just to tell you that my slides are working. um, Social conditioning, a lot of social conditioning tells women, and I've discovered ever since then that it's across countries. It's a good thing and a bad thing. In a good way, we are all we are all suffering from similar gender issues. But in a bad way, it's also, it's interesting to realize that however we have grown up, we seem to have absorbed some universal issues around what we can say as women and what is not acceptable to be spoken. One of the things that I have realized is we are very concerned about being liked. And the first lesson we learn is we need to be socially polite. We need to be likable, especially as women. The other is, and some of you shared that as an expectation, you don't want to sound boastful. Women are penalized much more than men for being boastful or coming across as boastful, even if we are not bragging, right? Even if we are justifiably talking about ourselves, it can be translated into, oh, is she bragging? So that's an issue that stops a lot of us. Let me know. Just say yes if you agree to social conditioning being a bit of a showstopper for you, right? Or you agreed with some of what I said. Just say yes or why so that I know that you're there.
Can people put in their comments on chat?
So I can see yes, people.
Yes.
Somebody says Ashwini, thank you. Suchitra says yes. Rachna, yes. Thank you very much for that feedback. So keep it coming, people. Sindhu says yes. Out of practice, a lot of us, because of these social issues or because of our self-made barriers, are out of practice sharing our value. Honestly, the first few times early in my career, when I spoke about myself, I was uncomfortable about it. Really, I was. No amount of my MBA and so on and so forth helped me to feel okay in my skin to talk about myself and just be relaxed about it. But that kind of relaxation and that confidence came from doing it over and over and over. So trust me, there's no magic pill there. If you practice talking about yourself in a balanced way enough, it starts to come naturally to you, and I assure you that. Priya says yes, so good to see that. And therefore, a lot of us are uncomfortable. We are out of practice. We imagine a bad reaction from people. So it's not a desired thing to do. A lot of times we have false humility. We cannot tell the difference, I've realized, between being boastful and just placing a value in front of other people. And that confusion between, oh, well, how am I communicating, stops us from communicating altogether. So I hope that this presentation helps you understand that there's false humility at play and it does not serve you. It doesn't serve you when you keep quiet instead of talking. There are moments you should be presenting yourself, and there are moments when maybe it's not appropriate to say much, right? So let's know the difference. Insecurity. Now, this is something that came out in a big way in the expectations you shared. And I would agree that this is something that requires attention. A lot of you talked about not having a feeling of enough self-worth. And I've inserted that word, feeling. Um, I don't think you don't have self-worth, but you cannot believe that you do. And there's a difference. So let's think of ourselves a little more generously and kindly through this presentation, because I think a lot of you have lots of value, even if I don't know you. But if you've come this far in life, you have your own share of wisdom. And so it's kind of not believable that you wouldn't have enough worth that other people might find useful. So, let's challenge ourselves on that level of insecurity that we all have. I have it. I just deal with it, right? I deal with it strongly and I put it aside and I said, no, I'm not letting my head take over. I'm going to go and do that because I know I'm useful in this situation. So I'll talk more about that. And of course, bad experiences. Some of you wrote that in an interview, the interviewer shut you down, or they hired somebody else and gave you feedback that you weren't good enough in the interview, or your boss disregards you. Some of you have said stuff like that. So yeah, when we have bad experiences, we step back. We say, okay, maybe I shouldn't do that. So I hope that we can challenge ourselves and say one bad experience should not decide our next step, right? Let's not take decisions out of fear, but let's take decisions out of possibilities. So that's something I try and do for myself. Now, let's keep talking on the chat, right? If you think that what I'm about to show to you, you have something to add to it, just type it out in brief and let me know if you have something to add to what I'm about to share. The other person also loses out, as do you, when you don't share what you're worth, or your worth, or you don't share your expertise, or you don't share your skills or your talents or any service that you can provide that can help another person. When you step back from that, these three things happen. We turn invisible, right? And what I mean by invisible is that you're not seen, you're not heard, therefore you're not acknowledged. And some of you have said, as you were registering for this webinar, that I feel like I'm not heard. And I felt, wow, that's a big symptom of being invisible. So think about it like this. Have you turned invisible? Because either we are not able to find a voice, or you found it, but you cannot have it heard. So that's one disadvantage of not learning how to communicate your value. People just don't know how to use your talents. It's also a little frustrating to not be acknowledged for what we bring to the table, right? It's not helpful. So that's a big disadvantage. And for me, the most important reason why we must learn how to put ourselves out there and make ourselves useful and learn to work around that discomfort is that others lose out. Others lose out. They lose out on something you could have done for them that would have changed the course of that product or service or that organization or that team or that individual. They may have benefited from crossing paths with you, but now you've stepped back and they will never discover that you would have done that for them, right? Or there was an advantage in knowing you. Now, so far so good. Give me some indication or give me a thumbs up or say makes sense. Let's say makes sense if so far what I have been saying is ringing a bell for you. As I move on, feel free to do that. Totally agree. Okay, Nitya says totally agree. Thanks, Nitya. So good. It makes a lot of sense. All right. So good to know I'm talking to real people, right? It's a little funny when you can't hear other people. I agree with all 3 points. Thank you, Ashwini. Payal says absolutely. All right. Now, because so many of you said that confidence was becoming a showstopper, Sindhu says practical, sounds practical. So many of you talked of confidence. I've inserted a few slides on it, right? Wasn't my plan, but here goes. Let me differentiate for you what is confidence and what is self-worth, right? Let's look at that difference so that you don't confuse the two and you actually work with both aspects of your personality properly. Confidence is about our readiness for a task. If I asked you, Ashwini, would you like to present these slides, right? Instead of me, Ashwini, can you present these slides? Now, Ashwini might tell me, sure, absolutely, piece of cake. I've done things like this in my company, Sonali. I could run these slides. Just give me a little bit of train the trainer and I'll do the job. Now, Ashwini is confident. She feels ready with some support to do this task. So let's say I teach Ashwini how to do this. But when Ashwini is doing the task, her self-confidence depends on whether she thinks she can do this task really well or not, whether she's worthy of doing this task well or not. In this situation, it isn't so much about the skill. You know the skill. You've learned the presentation. You've learned my slides, not rocket science, as they say. But do you feel worthy about presenting this, right? Do you feel from inside, I'm credible? I know this to be true. I think I'm believable in this situation and I'm going to do a good job of this. It isn't about clicking the slides. It's about what's happening in your head. So think about anything that you think you're an expert at. Do you not know how to do the job? Of course you do. Do you not know the skills for which you're being interviewed for a job? Because many of you talked of an interview situation. Of course you do. You've trained for it, you've learned it, you've been tested on it, you've found other jobs around it. So you know the skill. But why can we not therefore present ourselves very well in that interview, right? One is language and communication skills. Understandable, you can get better at it. But if you already have that, then sometimes it's just that we don't feel capable of doing what we know we can do. I'll repeat that. Sometimes we just don't feel capable. We don't feel that sense of belief to do what we know to do. right? So once we differentiate between confidence and self-worth, then you can ask yourself, am I feeling not confident? Is that the problem? Because I can do something about it. Or I just don't believe that I can do a good job. And that is a bigger issue. That's a more complicated issue when you don't have the belief, because that means the hard work has to happen inside. The interviewer may not be at fault. The interview may not be at fault. It's you who needs to have built yourself up and then gone into that situation, then presented to them what you already know to do very well, which is where your confidence comes from. So I'm going to pause. I've said a bit of a mouthful here, right? This is important because so many of you ask me this question. Say something that tells me that this is making sense. Feel free to disagree with me. Feel free to offer me another point of view. Or say got it. If you think you got the difference, let's say got it, right? Or make a comment. Gives me a chance to have my cup of tea, ladies.
So while they put in their comments, Sonali, there was an interesting thing that I heard yesterday at one of the events. So there was this company who said that humility in the candidates that they interview is something that they really look for. Humility. And of course, it's extremely difficult to really figure out whether somebody is humble, because at an interview you are expected to talk, not necessarily show off or brag, but of course you're always talking about what you have achieved and what you can do. So how does one, figure out whether this person is humble and just, talking about real achievements, or is really showing off? So if at all, you have time to kind of cover that aspect, in some ways, it'll be great.
Thank you, Nate. Just a humble bragging, right? The difference between that and true humility.
Yeah.
So I'm getting some comments. Pyle says, totally agree with you. Love the way you unpack both these concepts brilliantly. Worth pondering over. Thank you. Got it, Rachna says. It says, how do we increase the confidence if we are actually not very sure about our capability at a particular task? Great, Nitya. How do we increase our confidence? Even if it's a simpler answer, do more mock interviews, for example, whether through Jobs for Her or Neil Chama say, here is an opportunity. Here is the way to do mock interviews. Look at yourself in the mirror, right? Ask yourself questions, answer those questions. I've done it. I've answered mock questions to myself in a mirror to see whether I was confident attempting that interview. It's a simpler answer. Practice, more knowledge, more research, more preparation is generally the answer to lower confidence. But the answer to low self-worth takes a little longer because it is to do with conflicts in our mind around our worthiness, right? And as much as I'm making this presentation, let me make a confession to you. I have my moments of doubt. I have my moments of doubt, even though I'm teaching this topic. And I say, I don't know if I'm going to be good enough over there, right? Oh, I don't know if they will think that I can do this. I have to shake myself out of it and say, what am I doing, right? And I go back to my discipline, which I've cultivated over many years, to say, I'm worthy. I can do this. I think they will benefit from this. And as we go along, I'll give you some tips. As we get off this, I will give you some tips to enhance your confidence. Number one, positive self-talk for me is a great way to enhance your self-worth and also enhance your confidence. So let me give you a live example, a very relevant one. Before I came to do this webinar, I had little tingles, as you do. I was like excited. And I was like, oh my God, I'm so excited, right? This opportunity is so cool. Like, I have so many expectations listed from all of you. There's some good questions for me to answer. This is an opportunity for me to use some of my knowledge and experience for your benefit. Now, I had that kind of self-talk in my mind, and I was very deliberate about it. I was like, woohoo, this is going to go well. I'm excited. I could have gone in the opposite direction and said, I'm so nervous. I hope I don't make a hash of it. What if my internet connection drops? I'm not sure if I'll make sense to these women. I can't see them. This is so difficult. I hope I remember my slides. This is nonsense. I'm telling you myself, this is nonsense. We say these things to ourselves, which is complete garbage, and it sets us up for failure. So I fail sometimes, I have to tell you, but I try very hard to keep my self-talk on track. I don't say nonsense to myself. So if you're sitting waiting for your turn for an interview, or you are about to have that important phone call with a recruiter, with a customer, potential customer, ask yourself, what am I saying to myself? Ask that good question, the rational question, and say, am I talking sense to myself in this moment? And if you're not talking sense to yourself, stop. Have a glass of water, take a walk, right? Go to the bathroom. Practical, physical hacks. Do something that helps you switch back to the person you really want to be. Don't be on autopilot. When you're on autopilot, you say nonsense to yourselves. I say nonsense to myself. It's a human thing. Men do it too. It's not just a woman thing. So I hope that I'm able to convey this to you. Positive self-talk is not just a platitude. It really means something. Do the research, prepare. Like, for example, interview seems to be a lot of your context. Some of you are heading to entrepreneurship. Whatever be your context, do your research. Read media releases of this company, right? Read some controversies they've been in. Has there been a lawsuit against them? What are departing employees saying about them on places like Glassdoor or so on? Read about that company from various angles and perspectives, and then be ready to mold your interview in a way that you are the problem solver, right? So you're not just a candidate, you are placing yourself, because of now what you know, as a problem solver, as an answer to that role's demands. Making sense? You are the answer to what that role is supposed to do in that company or in that team. So that's a bright way to get out of your head, feel less nervous, and feel more strategic about your interview or about talking to a customer if you are an entrepreneur like me. Physical exercise. Lots of women have told me this. They run, they jog, they go to the gym, they do deep breathing, they do yoga. There's a very direct connection of physically moving our bodies and feeling more confident and feeling less insecure in ourselves. So if you don't exercise or you don't take care of your body, please use that as a great way to boost your confidence. Practice makes not perfect, but practice makes confident. I'm not a fan of perfection. Many women are victims of it. I'm a reformed perfectionist, and I think that it really helps to practice and align yourselves to outcomes. Like I said, be strategic, right? Don't just talk about, I have this education, I have these skills, I have these experiences. To what end? To what end? Why is the other person interested in you? Ask that question, right? They are listening to you because you are solving a problem or you're useful to them in some way. So please talk about outcomes and not just about yourself. That helps you to also not feel like you're bragging. Okay, I will pause in a bit. I have a few things to show to you which are rather quick, and then we'll get to some more things. This is how communicating your value, your talents, your education should feel like, right? Opposite to bragging. Comfortable, confident, worthwhile. So that's positive self-talk, right? You have to tattoo that into your brain. Relevant, value-based, inspiring for yourself and others. Safe, right? We need to feel safe, not unsafe, talking about ourselves. So that's your aspiration. That's how, if you're not feeling it, I hope you feel like that. And this is my motivator for you to practice some of what we are talking in this webinar. It helps you be visible, right? If you practice some of the strategies we are talking about, it will help you be more visible, less invisible. You'll feel confident, which seems to be a lot of your goal. You can find customers. You can find work, which is a lot of your goal. Create a network. I'm a big fan of that. Feel yourself motivated. Don't feel down, feel uplifted and feel connected with other people and feel connected internally to yourself. When you talk in front of other people, you're talking as a whole person, not like some part of you is talking and the other part of you is running away. By the way, keep talking, right? Please keep talking to me in the chat. If you want to ask a question, post it there. I'll come to it. So how do you communicate your value, right? You might want to make notes here, but I trust Nirja to communicate this material to you later on. Think of outcomes you create, right? So when you communicate your value, how do you do it? It's this vague thing, right? It's a vague thing. How do I do it? Well, think of the outcomes you create. So I'm an educator, I'm a trainer. What outcomes am I creating? I'm helping people challenge their beliefs. As an educator, I help people challenge their assumptions about themselves. That's my job. If I can have that outcome in this webinar, If I have even, there are 17 of us, if I have even 4 of you challenge your assumptions, I've done a halfway decent job. That's an outcome oriented value sharing. If you cannot figure out what's your value, well, ask a simple question. What makes you happy? What gives you joy? Right? I have artificial lights in front of me because it's evening for me and it's not very bright, unlike India right now. So I have artificial lights. But trust me, I'm glowing inside. I'm glowing inside because I'm joyful about what I'm doing. So I clearly know that this is part of my value. Easy and lazy. Think of your accomplishments. It sounds cliched, but make that list. Make that list of things that you have done and you go, woohoo, right? I did it. Maybe no one saw it, but you did something awesome for yourself or for a customer or for a team or for your stakeholders. So make a list of it, right? Go to it. There's a secret there of what your value is. All right. So I'm mindful of everyone's time because this may be lunch hour for you at work. So I'll move on. Think of times of confidence, right? So when you think of your accomplishments, you think of times of confidence, right? You think of times when you were yourself, when you felt elevated or you felt inspired in your ability to communicate about yourself. So that, again, there's a hidden message there that when you're confident is when you're sharing a value. So work backwards. When I'm confident, what am I feeling? What am I saying? What am I doing? What am I looking at, right? Where am I at physically, and that can give you a hint about what's your value. Think of what makes you proud. Think of what makes you proud. That's another good one. And get feedback from people you trust. Now, here's a bit of a caveat. When people you trust tell you good things about yourself, they can go overboard, right? They exaggerate your value. They will tell you all the good things and more. So you got to talk to a trusted advisor who can also be a critic, who can tell you truthfully what you're very good at and who can truthfully tell you things that you might be average at, but you can do better. So you don't need a fan. You need a trusted advisor who can help you to discover some of your value. Oh, are we back on chat? Okay, yay. Nitya says chat is working. Yes, we can chat now. Yippee. So, like I said, post your questions there. I will come to them. We have a Q&A section, ladies. So I won't, hopefully I won't miss much. All right, so important part of the proceedings, right? Pick your moment. Pick your moment to convey your value. Pick your moment, which means the issue about should I be humble? Am I humble bragging? Am I bragging outrightly? And so on is an issue which comes up, and this is important. The issue of immodesty comes up when we have picked the wrong topic, the wrong moment. I'll give you an example. I was at a meeting where there were at least 30 other women, and an organization had invited diverse women to discuss a community related issue. So, I was invited, so I went. And 30 of us were divided into different table groups, as you do, and we all had our table group and we were supposed to discuss something and so on. One of the young women at my table, and I say young specifically because she seemed anxious to succeed, and we had lots of cultural and age diversity at our table. She took up the first chance to speak, which is wonderful, so thumbs up to her. But then she spoke on her own for the next 5 minutes. She wouldn't stop. She didn't take a breath. She got more and more animated as she spoke. She got a little louder and faster. And at that point, when she had been speaking for like a good 4 minutes already, I could see that we were all exchanging glances at that table because this was getting awkward. And from being a go-getter and a woman who was smart, she was, going in a zone where we were wondering whether she needs to pause. And I thought in my mind, she's being visible, but is she being visible in the most desirable way? It's a thing you learn with judgment. It doesn't come overnight, right? I'm sure she meant well. And in some way, a senior person at the table gave her that feedback that she needed to have paused and not rolled other people's opinions at the table. It wasn't a gender issue. It wasn't an ego issue. I saw it happen and I agreed with that feedback. So here's my submission to you. Choose your moment. Interviews are the moment to talk about yourself, whether you're hesitant, introverted, shy. Like I said, practice before you go there. But that's your moment in response to a question to briefly share your value. Then look for some feedback for you to do it. Wait for another question. Not just speak for 5 minutes non-stop, right? Even when invited. So that bit of judgment is important for someone to value what we are saying, because we've given a pause to have an engagement with them. That requires practice, but that's a very important tip from me. Okay, so Soumya is asking a question that I can take up right now. She's saying, wonderful session. Thank you, Soumya. She's saying, could you give an example on how to align value to outcome? So a while back, so it doesn't have to be numeric. No, we don't always have to say things like I made these many dollar difference, or I sold this, helped sell this product to 10,000 people. It could be a qualitative value, right? You could say, in my previous role as a team leader, I was instrumental in helping my team get onto a task which was quite complex for everyone, for which they didn't have enough experience. And I was able to lead the team in a way that we were able to organize that task, share it amongst ourselves, and deliver it on time to the customer, something like that. So your outcome can be qualitative, and your outcome can be powerful if it is also numeric. It's a number, right? It's a dollar value, or it's a customer number. So I hope answers that. Listen and align, right? So to talk without a pause, like for example, right, Nija is helping me out today. I'm trying to be mindful of pausing once in a while, and I'm involving you. I'm trying hard to involve you. I'm reading your questions, I'm reading your comments, I'm trying not to go too fast. I mean, we are all Indians. If we are all Indians, I don't want to assume that. But most of us Asians speak English really fast, right? You know that already. So that's a bit of my problem too. I have to be mindful. So listen and align, which means when people sometimes interrupt us, I've learned that it's not like they're challenging us. It's not like they want to contradict us, but they have a different thought process. They do want to add something, and it's wise to stop and acknowledge their point of view. Might be very different than mine, so what? We can still acknowledge their point of view and say, all right, so Soumya, what I hear you say is, and that's a great way to start a neutral sentence, because some of you wanted tips on communication, so here goes. So what I'm hearing you say is that you think that confidence is not something that can be practiced. Let's say you're saying something like that, right? And I'm saying confidence is something you can get out of practice. So we are saying something opposite. But I can still respectfully acknowledge Soumya's point of view and say, okay, Soumya, is that what you're saying? And then she nods and say, yeah, that's what I'm saying. You know what that does? It allows the other person to listen to you more. It allows you to not feel negatively about someone who may be contradicting you. And that can happen in an interview. You know, sometimes people heckle you a little bit, depending on how the panel is behaving. So I would say listen and align is a very important aspect. Speaking is important. Listening is sometimes even more important. I've covered this, speak and outcome, so I won't repeat that. But if you want additional inputs, Neerja and I can coordinate and I can share more over email. Engage the person, right? Engage the person, whatever situation you might be in. As much as we love to talk about ourselves, the other person has a story to tell. You be the person who asks, so tell me a little more about you, right? Or is this the kind of information that's proving useful to you? Let me pause, let me check with you. Or have you had this experience the way I'm sharing with you? You know, does this sound familiar? You know, sometimes it's just something neutral like that, and then keep quiet. And the other person just feels very grateful that you brought them in, and they engage with you, which means sharing your value becomes easier. It's not an uphill task. It's not you doing it alone. It's you doing it in partnership. Have allies. In some ways, if you think about it, Neerja is my ally on this webinar. Asha is my ally on this webinar, right? It's important to have people backing you. Think about it. Who around you backs you, right? Who around you supports you if you fall? If you don't have enough such trusted people around you, please cultivate them, right? topic for another day on how to do it. But cultivate them. It's important to have people who think positively of us, who are respectful of our value, who talk well about us behind our backs. We need an army of such people, men and women and all genders, who can do that for us so that we are not doing this alone. As much as you're attending this webinar alone, let me assure you, you are not getting to your goals by yourself. It is so hard. It is so hard and it is so unnecessary, right? I have a very big network in Adelaide, though it was 2.5 years ago. It was a new city for me. So I made it my business to go get to know people. And I bravely went and met many, many, many people. I had 3 meetings today. I met new people because I realized that I can't get done my goals on my own. It's just too hard. And so remember, that's a very important aspect. Doesn't matter you're alone in your interview, but you will have allies backing you before you go there. Follow up. Follow up with people, which is to say, once you've shared your value, once they've given you some response, don't keep quiet. Write an email, write a thank you note, make a phone call, write a message, close the loop. And not just should you be focused on sharing your value, please also amplify other men and women around you, right? Speak well of them as much as possible, genuinely. But find people that you can amplify, find people that you can talk about and say, you know, they're so good at this. Have you met that person? Have you checked their LinkedIn profile, right? Or I'm happy to recommend them. Can I write a recommendation for you on LinkedIn? Or can I write something for you on Facebook if you have a business page? Find ways to give to people, because that's when you start this positive cycle of getting back. So you take the first step, right? If you're not hearing enough about yourself, talk about other people, talk well of them, and it will come back to you. Okay, so I've spoken of some pretty significant things. I'm peeping at my chat to see if you're asking me something, saying something.
Sonali, on the Q&A, there are 2 questions. I'll read it for you. Asha is saying, I feel many times I'm judged for having taken a break early in my career. How do I go about it? That's something that makes me doubt my self-worth.
If you think about it, great question. I think might be many of might have that question. I've taken career breaks at least twice in my career, and each time it has been tough for me to get back into the job market. I've realized there are 2 aspects of it. There might be intense competition around you, which makes it harder to get back into the job market. But it's also in your hands how you project that gap, right? There are women I know who very proudly say that they were on a maternity break. There are women who proudly say they were taking care of an aging parent, or a child who was unwell, or a spouse who was unwell, and or their own health, and that they had caring responsibilities. They learned life lessons. They learned strength of character in that place. They had new realizations that helped them do their jobs better. They educated themselves while they were on the break. So they were not just sitting and doing nothing. It's also how skillfully you convey that you grew as a person in that break. And while it is tough, and there are some disadvantages to going back into the job market, which is very HR related, not so much about your work, but more about HR practices out there, some of which are not really great. Think about it. What's in your hands? Do a good job of that. Try to get some professionals to look at your resume. Find the right words to convey that gap properly. Learn to talk about that gap instead of being apologetic about it.
Sonali, the other one, you may have, already spoken about it. The question came in a little ago. I don't know the name of the person, is holding a Galaxy J7 phone, I guess, because that's what it says. When we try to do humble bragging and communicate our value, it is often seen as being aggressive. Well, humble bragging, okay, maybe, I don't know, as being aggressive and bossy. How do we handle this kind of stereotyping?
Right. And the thing is, there is this stereotype, but we have to ask ourselves if we are playing into that stereotype as well. And I know that's a little hard for women to gulp down, that they may be, sorry, I pressed something. It might be a little hard for women to acknowledge that we may be acting in accordance with your stereotype, even when no one is putting it on us, because we are so conditioned. Even if their stereotype is there, or even if there is that social penalty of talking about ourselves, we have the choice of not adhering to it, right? Doing the right thing. If you're confident in your skills, if you're confident in how you're communicating, you practice it, you've taken feedback on it, you've recorded yourself, you listen to yourself, and you know you're not sounding arrogant, then I say, please don't please don't waste your time with it. Don't think too hard about it. You've got to be well prepared that you are speaking sense, you're speaking it in the right tone, you're talking in the right manner, to the right person at that right time. And if someone still comes back to you, mostly no one does, but if you think someone still comes back to you and says, you know what, I think you shouldn't have said that, or you know what, well, maybe you should be more humble. Always ask such people, could you be specific in your feedback? Could you please specifically tell me? I acknowledge what you're saying to me. I'd like to improve the next time. Can you tell me at what point you may have heard me being immodest or boastful? And then just keep asking the question. Most people cannot tell you very specifically what they mean because maybe they are also pushing a stereotype onto you. So I refuse to participate. I know this sounds pretty bad, but I refuse to participate in stereotypes because as long as I've done my preparation, taken feedback, and I know what I'm doing, I don't care, honestly.
Payal, Sonali, there is a question from Payal, and if you could just check your speaker volume because you are a little low on volume. There is a thin line between humble bragging and oversharing about yourself, which can expose you to more risks. How does one draw a line? This is what Payal is asking, just for the benefit of everyone else.
It's a hard thing, Payal, to do in theory. It's a very hard judgment to cultivate in theory. And I say this because if you try and have this, if you try and figure out what's that thin line of difference in your head, you'll find it very hard. You've got to do it in practice and you may make some mistakes. So find some low risk environments like a training program, like a mentoring session, like a conversation with a trusted advisor, as I said before, and say, hey, you know what? I want to practice my pitch on you. I want to practice how I will answer the question. Tell me about yourself, right? In the interviews, they love asking that question. So, Payal, tell me about yourself, right? Most recruiters ask that. So, practice that answer and then practice it to a point where you know that you are figuring out the thin line of difference. It's very hard to do it in your head and it's hard to tell on a slide. It's a judgment call. I always watch people's reactions. I see if they're leaning forward and smiling at me or they're drawing away from me and folding their hands. Because if they're drawing away and folding their hands, I know something is not clicking for this person. So I pause and I say, so far, am I making sense? Is this what you were hoping to hear? So I put the ball back in their court. If I have any doubt that I'm not being heard in the right way, I just stop. But I ask the proper question. I just don't stop. I say, am I making sense so far? And this person will give you a hint as to what's going on in their minds. And that's also how I've sharpened my judgment by taking active feedback in the moment, not just going on talking and then saying, oh my God, I don't know what happened there.
Sonali, our time is up, but we can definitely continue for 5 more minutes if you have the time, because we have a lot of questions and I'm not sure whether you completed your deck.
Right. I think, I had very little slides, but I'm so happy we did the questions instead of,
Sure.
my last slide was this, and I'm happy to leave it that. Literally the last slide. I'm happy to leave it here.
Sure.
And, this is something that I promised that I will give some examples of value statements so we are bang on time. And I'm happy to stick these in an email and you can send to everybody.
Sure. So we'll take a couple of questions. Sindhu says, should we be prepared with multiple pitches about ourselves? And what should the duration of the pitch be, as it depends on the interviewer or the industry? Can you share more on picking the moment? It hasn't been easy.
Good questions, both of them. I think you should have multiple pitches for different contexts. That's a very good idea. At the same time, have something which is a value statement that forms the core of your pitches. So, for example, I don't have one value statement, I have several. But one of the core statements for me is I help people develop and grow so they can reach their goals. My job as an educator is to help people develop and grow so they can reach reach their goals. Now, I can have various variations of this value statement depending on who I'm talking to. So I like that, type it out based on examples you're seeing on the screen and say, okay, here is what, I'd like to say to this person, and here's what I'd like to say to the other person. Picking the moment is again a question of judgment. It's a subtle thing, but it is often not that hard either. For example, if you're talking to a potential customer, I generally begin by asking instead of telling. That's how I figure out my moment. They tell me the moment. I've asked first, how are you doing, or how's the day going? So I read that in your email. Could you tell me a little more about what you just spoke in your email? Or I know we had spoken about that. Can you tell me a little more? So I invite that person if they are a customer kind of person or they are a very senior person. And then when they pause at the end of that summary of sharing, then I pick that moment to share how I can be useful to them or what they are doing. In an interview situation, the moment is when the person says, tell me a little more about yourself, right? Or that cliched question of, why should we hire you for this job? That's your moment. Those are times when you can share your value statements.
Great. I'm just looking up any other questions that we missed. Examples of how to align value to outcome. We have discussed that. So I think we've taken all the questions which have come so far on chat and Q&A. Is there anything else that you would want Sonali to talk about? Maybe last couple of minutes before we close this masterclass. People can put up their hand, put it out on the Q&A window or the chat window. I don't see anyone putting out anything. So thank you, Sonali, for making time for this session. It has been extremely helpful, and it doesn't matter whether you are early in your career or you kind of have 25 years of experience like me. This is always, something that bothers us. Even yesterday, I was at a session where I had to give a talk, and of course, I was extremely confident because I had done the rehearsals. I knew my material, but my session was the 5th or the 6th, so I sat through listening to 5 other speakers before me, and then I actually asked myself the self-worth question in my head. So I think it comes over a period of time, but you need to kind of keep at it. The tips that Sonali has given are immensely useful. Please do put it in action, because that's when you will slowly see it really bringing in the results that you're all looking forward to. Thank you, Sonali, once again.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Biasis. Thank you. Nirja and team, thanks for making this happen across the 7 seas. Technology, I wasn't nervous about my presentation. I was more nervous about technology. Hours for internet where I am at right now. Everyone comes from office and logs off and starts downloading stuff. But I'm so happy we survived. And thank you so much to all of you who joined and who asked questions and responded on chat. Look forward to hearing more of your questions and happy to answer them any which way that Nirja thinks appropriate. Thank you.
Surely. Thank you all, and we will see you at the next masterclass. Bye-bye.